Welcome to the Indigenous Voice. Today it's September 14th, and once again we are really privileged to have with us Elder Tom Sampson from the Tsartlip First Nation to continue with the series started a month ago or two shows ago about the Indigenous right. Welcome back, Elder Tom. Thanks for coming again on the show. And as we were talking in the last time, we started the series about Indigenous right. And you were talking about the Supreme Canada ruling in regard to this Indigenous rights. So if you want to please continue with the subject and tell us about the issue of the Indigenous community when they deal with multiple layers of institution like the federal, the provincial, and the judicial system.
One of the most important things that has always been sort of the center of who we are is our language, the language we speak in the Saanich area, which is Tsawout. But our relatives who live next door to us, further up island, the Cowichan people, they speak a different language altogether. It's called Hulkaminam. And because we're so close, there's some of our words are common. Some of them sound alike, and some of them even mean the same, but mostly they were different. A lot of things that we say in our ceremonies are different. And that distinction makes us who we are. There's always been an assumption that an Indian is an Indian and that's all that matters. Well, that's not true. We're very distinct and we're very diverse in the sense that even though we're not that far apart, maybe 50 miles apart, there's extreme differences in a lot of our ceremonies and some of the cultures that we carry out, especially in the ceremony stuff. But the problem that we have in modern time, in the year 2016, is this assumption that we can set a system up that would make us all the same. In other words, indoctrinate all of the Indian tribes to just be one nation. That's never going to happen, because we spend a lifetime speaking our language, practicing our culture, raising families, and we even had extreme differences with some of the tribes. Not to a point that there was war, but differences. The only wars we had were extreme differences with the northern tribes outside of Coast Salish country. And those were the tribes further north. But the elders always told us that once we name a place, its identity, its location, that becomes our property, the land that belongs to our people. And that's called traditional territory, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, Hulkaminam, Tsawout people. And that's important for the public to know, because just because they live in the mainland, Lower Vancouver, and us on the island, there's an assumption that we're different. We're not. We're the same people. We speak the same language. We have many of our ceremonies are identical. But the reason we had to learn about the island people are different. The Coast Salish are a little bit different. You get interior of British Columbia, Washington, different, and Coast Salish people, like up the Fraser River. Mm-hmm. Those are all Coast Salish people. There are 55 tribes that are Coast Salish, and there are 6 tribes that are different. They're Coast Salish, but they speak a different language called Tsawout on the Canadian side of the border. On the American side, there's about 4 or 5 tribes that speak the Tsawout language. The rest are Hulkaminam. So when we look at Coast Salish country, we're looking at probably what one of our friends that did a survey on land that's actually controlled by Coast Salish people was over 600,000 million acres of land. Over 500,000 square miles of territory that our tribes once controlled. And for years, that knowledge has never been properly explained. Even though history books have written some things, it didn't get into the details about our contribution to the development of this country in terms of providing accommodations for the first immigrants that came to this country in the early 1400s, mid-1400s, right up until the present day. So we've had a tremendous impact on our culture, tremendous impact on a way of life. So when we talk about the land here on the island, we talk different than the tribes on the mainland. They have rivers and lakes. We have the ocean. So we're called Tsawout, the people who live at the edge of the water, the ocean. So we have to know about that. So those are some of the differences that a lot of people don't really understand. And the other point I think that public needs to know is the treaty tribes. There are what they call Douglas Treaty tribes in this particular area, Greater Victoria, Sauk, Saanich, and the northern tribes of Vancouver Island, the Kwakiutl people, have a treaty as well. But our treaty gave us the rights. It wasn't given the right, it was acknowledged that we had the right to hunt and fish and live in our communities as if we were the sole occupants of the land. In other words, there would be no governing body that would control who we are. And this is a pre-Confederation treaty before Canada became a country. And when Canada became a country, the Queen of England and the colonizing people came in, they declared Canada their country. And I guess at that particular time in the 14th century, 15, 16, 17, right up to the 20th century, that misunderstanding has always been an issue with us. And those issues have caused us to come into conflict with the colonizer. We end up in court, go to court, and many times, in the early days, many of our people were incarcerated, even for doing our winter ceremonies, our ceremonies that pertain to our way of life. We were put in prison for that. Our longhouses were destroyed. Anything that symbolized who we are was either taken away, confiscated, or destroyed.
So, Elder Tom, the important question here, when you talk about the court, how the same state that destroys, from one hand, the indigenous land, culture, language, is going to provide justice on the other hand?
We have been to the courts, the international courts. Our people went to England in the early days, and they wanted to talk to the Queen about what was happening in Canada. And she, at that time, I guess, told our people that Canada now was in charge of the rights of the indigenous people here. And that was never ever part of our agreement, to allow our pre-Confederation treaty, to allow Canada to control our rights, or the treaty that we had before Canada became a country. Because that was guaranteed by the Crown of England, and it was transferred to Canada. Canada has never ever been good at acknowledging those things. The previous government spent millions and millions of dollars fighting against indigenous and treaty rights, even though it's been recognized in the international law. the indigenous laws around the world have been acknowledged by almost every country in the world. Canada and the United States, and I think it was England, one of the few countries that did not recognize it, didn't want to acknowledge it. But in India were forced to acknowledge it because of issue of human rights that was occurring here in Canada. So Canada now has acknowledged Indigenous rights. This new government, this Liberal government that's in power now, the Minister of Indigenous Affairs at the United Nations conference in New York stood up in front of the world and she said, the First Nations, Indigenous people of Canada, their constitutional rights are fully protected in their Section 35. She went on to say that whole Section 35 is a full box of Indigenous rights. There is nothing excluded from it. And that includes our language, our history, our everything that we were before. Those are still there according to this particular minister that's in charge of Indigenous affairs now. The Prime Minister of Canada also said that when we get elected, we're going to walk hand in hand as nations to make sure that everything that was here before colonization started will be acknowledged and recognized. Well, that has taken time, and it's caused a lot of confusion in this country. Right at this moment, there are constant conflicts between the various provinces across Canada, Alberta, Saskatchewan, British Columbia. They're having extreme differences in terms of resources. And what the Supreme Court of Canada has said, that Indigenous rights exist and there can be no movement unless those rights are acknowledged and recognized and implemented. So having said that, the bureaucrats, British Columbia, Ottawa, the Department of Indian Affairs, they're something else. They don't seem to understand that the law has changed in this country, and they don't want to change it. Tribes now are taking governments to court, challenging them, and we're winning there. And our hope is that this government that's in place now doesn't waste millions of dollars fighting with us like the previous government. You know, the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars was spent fighting against treaty rights and Indigenous rights, only to find out that the Supreme Court of Canada says it exists, not only in modern time, but even in the 17th century. Indigenous rights was already recognized in the Superior Court of Quebec. So this issue of rights then, even though it's clearly been defined in the Canadian Constitution, and even though the Supreme Court of Canada said this is what must happen now, the bureaucrats, the Indigenous affairs bureaucrats are not prepared to let go. You know, for whatever reason, we don't know. You know, I've been around a long time, and I chaired the Constitutional Working Group for the Status Indians of Canada, and I saw the attitude that was there. This whole attitude of prejudice, systemic attitude towards who we are. It hasn't gone away.
It's now maybe a politer racism. It's not that obvious as before. It's just under the service.
One of the leaders in the United States, Colonel Powwow, he was a commander of the Army in the United States, he said, shame should not be something we shouldn't admit. Shame should be a learning process. If we are ashamed of what we've done, why don't we say so and make it right? So that kind of attitude and feeling in this country, North America especially, has been slow in changing. I don't know the reason why.
But they are kind of so fast on other issue, like when it comes to protection of environment, when it comes to gays' right and other issue, they are so immediately behind these issue. But when it comes to indigenous right or about poverty, about nobody care about this issue. So I wonder really about if they are really serious when they talk even about gays' rights or
Well, you know what the problem is, and we've been talking about this for the last couple of years. It's what we call these enclaves that have been created by the federal government, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, now the Bureau of Indigenous Affairs now. What they did, and they did a real good job at it, they trained our people to be those bureaucrats. So our people are now
thinking in the same way.
They were the colonized, now they are the colonizer, our own people. They carry out government projects, programs, even the language. You know, citizenship, for example. They said, you were Canadians, and I said, okay, Canadians. But also, we have an indigenous citizenship that predates any history in this country. And that's still alive, and we practice it every winter in my community. And land tenure. We've been practicing land tenure for thousands and thousands of years. When they made the treaties with us, they said that, oh, this piece of land belongs to you now. That's not what we understand. When we made a treaty with the government, with the colonial government, Governor Douglas, we gave him the right to come here. He didn't give us any rights. In fact, we granted the right to them, not...
Yeah, exactly, not the other way around.
Yeah, now they've got it backwards. So now that's why we're in court. You know, and we spend, again, time and time again, we've been telling the government, you know, and this Prime Minister has said, change is going to happen. Well, I'm not too optimistic about that. Not because I don't see some chance of change, but because what I've seen in the years I was involved in politics, I quit because all I was when I was the chief of my tribe, I was just a messenger for the government. And our people began to hate me, dislike me, because I was sounding like the government, and I was. So 35 years ago, I quit. I said, I don't want to be chief no more, because it's not going anywhere, and it will never go anywhere, because the policies of the government, the legislation that which is, as far as I'm concerned, illegal, because it has put so much pain and pressure into our community, into our families, and into our whole nation as a people. And it's the Indian Act that's doing that. And because our people have been so deeply entrenched in colonization, they can't see any other way a way out. You see, the government provides billions of dollars, what's called into the Indigenous Affairs now. I think I forget, over 13 billion or something like that. That money never reaches us. It's divided up amongst the provinces, and education institutions get part of that money to teach Indigenous law, Indigenous rights. And I wonder sometimes, where did these universities learn about Indigenous, the real meaning of Indigenous rights? Where did they learn it from?
Elder Tom, we are actually out of time, but I'm so glad. And as you noticed, the time runs so fast, and we did not talk about Red Deer Camp because this is a very important subject. But We are so glad to hear again from you, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this issue in the future episode. So thanks again.
A pleasure to come here. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this segment of Indigenous Voice.
Each and every one of you for coming today. We just really appreciate that people have come forward, and I really want to thank my dear friend Belinda for all of, and Earl for what they have to bring forward. It reminds us that our way of life is not artifact, it's not mythology, it's live today, and they are our curriculum. They are the ones that are helping to guide the youth. And that's what our concern is here with this process, is that we are here to protect the rights of the youth. 2/3 of the population of most of the Indigenous communities is youth, and we need to help provide and protect that way of life. We don't want salmon to be part of a mythology that's only reflected in artwork. It's real. It was one of the first gifts provided to our people to sustain us, as well as the cedar was provided as a gift to sustain us. It kindles quickly so that we can find warmth. It also provided our shelter. You didn't need tools to work with cedar. You could split cedar just using water and wedges. So it was one of the most important gifts for us, as well as provided for the transportation system. So that's what our concern is when you ask us, how do we reconcile Aboriginal rights and Crown? I think it's really important that Crown begins to understand none of this is consultation until you hear what we're saying. We're very opposed to economic development that is resource plundering, whether it's marine environment or it's land environment. Resource plundering affects each and every one of us in our way of life. British Columbia has taken a lot of pride in its natural beauty, its natural resources, and here we are at the threshold of some serious exploitation that could cause our way of life to disappear completely. And for First Nations people, many of us, very concerned that as pipelines go through, as tankers go through, it affects the last existence of our remains in the land, of our artifacts in the land. Our place is removed from history as the land becomes developed, as it continues to be overturned. And we've had this, as Belinda talks about many of her stories, we've had many of our important, not artifacts, but important landmarks removed. And they tell us about important history, or about how our young people are to be taken through puberty. A stone bowl, for instance, removed from where it existed for probably centuries, just removed by non-native people wanting something that they consider to be valuable, that they need to have for their home, that they want to put in a fountain possibly in their garden. So that we're very concerned about what this impact will have on us as a way of life. I think that for me, thinking about the Salish Sea, now that it's been called the Salish Sea, there's something very significant, very important. It's there to be protected for all Salish people. It's a gesture of reconciliation, of recognition of those treaty rights, of those rights, as Earl said, existed and were practiced before proclamation, before the Royal Proclamation. And that we as saltwater people, before we had a Douglas Treaty, before we defended the Saskatchewan Bay Marine Case, saltwater people were the richest people in the world. We were taught that by one of our great teachers, Dave Elliott Sr., that we never had to hunger for food, we never had to beg for money, because everything that we needed was provided for us by the riches of the sea. Where we live and sail is one of the most important saltwater mudflats. And mudflat is very distinct in all the life forms that it provides. It's all there to provide and build on each system, sustaining each other. So that the eelgrass is there for the crab. It's also there for the 5 different kinds of salmon. They court each other in there. As well, there's many medicinal plants that are there to help clean the water and keep it clean. The barnacle life is there to keep the water clean. And we see all of that disappearing. Very, very concerned that wave action has an impact on that. Spills have an impact on that. And Earl talked about that wave action, the vibration, that we don't know all what it does to the microsystems that are in the water. And in Sanderson Bay, we also have the freshwater, saltwater marsh. It's a very distinct feature of the environment that has a very distinct purpose. Without it, there are microorganisms that will die off. So we have a great concern as this kind of economic development tries to push its way into our territory. And we're not just a land-based people, as many people have said here. We are marine-based. We have names of our places where we've been, places where we've lived. And our land base is very small because we didn't need to have an accumulation of land because we used the water, we used the lands. Our families camped in very regular places. They met up in very regular places. They used the land in a very specific way. And that kept us strong as people, kept us united as people. Belinda provided her name, her Indian name that was given to her. My name is Tiwanama, and that name comes to me from Nanaimo. And that's to remind us where we originate from, where our mothers originate from. That's my great-great-grandmother's name, given to my mother, and then now given to me and given to my daughter. So it reminds us of who we're related to, but it also reminds us of where we come from, and so that if we do happen to be in a territory, and we do want to have some fishing privileges or hunting privileges, we may have relations there if we share our name. So that often is something that we do, share our name. And I think that it is just a real concern, again, that we think about the cumulative effects of this kind of development. And it starts from that very small system, the algae system, the one-cell life form. I think it's very much of a concern. I saw a lady from Connecticut one time singing to a little one-celled animal, and that animal started to dance as she was singing. And she was just reminding us about how important our connection is to the smallest system. And much of the artwork reminds us of that all the time. The messages, the most important messages come to us from the smallest messengers. So you will often see a mouse as your most important messenger. A very humble being will come to you and provide that message. And I think that's how we as First Nations people are coming forward. We may be small in terms of what we're able to bring forward. We may not be able to have a lot of policy analysts, research at our disposal, lawyers at our disposal, but we come with a very important, clear message to save the environment. And it's not to save the environment for us to this day, but to save it for the generations of children that are ahead of us. And a real concern for us is that what sustains us as a people is our way of life. What sustains us as a people are our teachings. We want that to help our youth, to ground them in what's good about their identity, what's strong about their identity. And we want to make sure that we stand tall for the environment for them. We cannot just lay down and let this happen without saying something. This is not right. This is not consultation, because somewhere along the line, the minds have been already made up by the federal and provincial government, failing it over and over and over again to recognize what has been put before you already about Aboriginal rights, Indigenous rights, First Nations rights, Douglas Treaty rights, whatever you want to call it. It's there. It's been laid out before you, and you need to recognize it and uphold it as we try to do, because it's very important. And I know I grew up on that mudflat, and I reflect over and over again how I used to watch our fishermen go out there. And like Belinda and others have said, the reef net fishery was a practice. But as we knew when we grew up, it was easy to get fish. It was easy to hunt ducks. They were there in vast quantity for us. Our table was set for us, and that's what Dave Elliott told us and wanted to instill in us, that we were the richest people in the world. And that mudflat has a particular smell, and some people don't like it. But when you walk up there on it, you can just see how alive it is, all of the different features of it. And we know very much that the eelgrass is damaged by boats, by tankers, just by people. We know how important that feature is to our bay, but also everywhere. We can't understand why the province allows those products to be harvested, and they call it aquaculture. And that's destroying as well our sea urchin. And the sea urchin is one of the most important products that we have. And it's being marketed internationally, but we cannot get it to sustain ourselves as a basic food. And now it's a medicine for the old people, and it's a gesture of respect because it's so hard to come by. So I think that we're asking to be heard, but we're saying time and time again very consistently that we do not want to have these kind of developments happening in our waters or on our land. The hunting and fishing rights are there forever. They are not to be extinguished. They are not to be infringed upon. Those were things that were told to us by the government of the day. We've been given other words: accommodation, mitigation, restoration, reconciliation. And a lot of times it's us who bear the burden of telling you what that means. Yet we've consistently said the same thing. It means let us live as people free in our own homeland and using the land and the water together to sustain us as strong, healthy people. I find that the whole process has been very disrespectful, very confusing, and it's very coercive. In many situations, the first thing that comes to our tables is the offer of a mutual benefits agreement. And I think that's very coercive to do that to people who are struggling with major health issues, issues of housing, and issues of really no economy, no way to build up an economy to sustain the people. So I really think that if you're taking anything back to the National Energy Board, it's to really go back to the table and really talk about mitigation. We were talking to them about mitigation, meaning how are we going to sustain the salmon fishery? How are we going to ensure that the waters are safe for the whale? And then all the other microsystems, as we said, that we talked about that are so important. We look at the Fraser River, we look at all of these estuaries that are so important to us. Will they be there if there's that wave action? And that's a big concern. And we already know what's happening to our salmon. That it's not even wild salmon anymore. That it's been contaminated, and that was an economic development idea. So I think we need to be careful in what we do as we step forward. But I think that it's been really clear from First Nations that we've said no thank you to this. And how do we push back? So I just want to say Haiska Hela, and I really hope that you will hear people today and tomorrow and throughout the time that you're traveling, that you will hear what people are saying, and you understand that it's very hard to come forward to processes like this because so much of our words get interpreted as consultation It's not consultation until we actually are heard, and particularly in British Columbia exists at the goodwill of First Nation. British Columbia is still unceded First Nations territory.
Very nice. Thank you.
For everybody's information, while we had a bank machine last year, we don't have any bank machines this year. The closest one to here is at the corner of Verdier and West End, RBC. Put your hands together for the men's duet. it's okay. Just okay.
One more!
Put your hands together for the women's fancy. Line up, girls. Put your hands together for the women's jingle. And that was Tell the Beat.
Yeah!
Line up, boys. Judges are happy. Judges are happy. 4 fires, stand by for a sneak up. 4 fires, stand by for a sneak up. Boys, get a water. Next time, don't pout. We're just waiting for the high sign from Take It Away, Top of the Creek Juniors. together for the men's traditional dancers. Line them up, boys. Line them up, boys. Line up, boys. Oh, you guys got bought and paid for. We're going to go one more. Get a drink of water. Okay. Just waiting for the high sign. I think we have all the dancers. Take it away. For everybody's information, while we had a bank machine last year, we don't have any bank machines this year. The closest one to here is at the corner of Verdier and West End, RBC. Put your hands together for the men's duet. It was okay. Just okay.